goal, Chris Billy, Huddersfield Town. The most famous goal of Chris Billy's life.
Is this the moment for Lee Fowler? It is. Take your place in Division 2, Huddersfield Town.
Thank you.
And Steve Simonson's boots now. He's missed. Steve Simonson clears the frame of the goal and collapses in a heap of tears. Huddersfield Town are promoted.
Mustafa Schindler has a chance to write his name in Huddersfield Town legend. And he takes that chance!
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Andy Takes That Chance podcast. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past week, you will know that Neil Warnock is no longer the manager of Huddersfield Town. We've all been through a wide range of emotions and it's hard to know how to feel. But that rock would probably say it doesn't matter how you feel because as quick as a flash, in comes Darren Moore to step into the boots of the legend. Since the announcements, there's been a collective shrug from the town fans over the past few days. Over the last few years, I've heard both positive and negative comments about Darren Moore, suggesting that he's a great bloke with little tactical acumen, which has always left me feeling a little bit unsure. So, in search of the truth, we've sought out the opinion of those that have seen Darren Moore in action, and Brady has joined me as well today. So, how are we doing, Brady?
I'm good. Excited to do this. It's never dull at Huddersfield, is it?
It is not. Do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we all heard the news this week that Darren Moore has replaced Neil Warnock. As we heard confirmed in the press conference today, it is a multi-year deal. So it was, I think Jake Edwards said 3 years plus one. So Darren Moore himself, he started his managerial career at West Brom. And then, we'll hear a little bit more from Chris Hall from Albion Analytics about his time there later. Then obviously he managed Doncaster Rovers and in League One. And as I'm sure most people know listening to this, most recently he was at Sheffield Wednesday where he actually secured promotion by the playoffs in League One to the Championship. Darren's he's 49 years old. Obviously he's a former player as well. And as I'm sure we'll come on to touch on a little bit, he actually played under Neil Warnock and mentioned that in his press conference. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose we'll come on to it, won't we, Matt?
Yeah, okay. So let's hear what other people think. Darren Moore, of course, started his career off at West Brom. So I asked Chris Hall from Albion Analysis for his thoughts on the appointment.
Chris Hall here from Albion Analysis podcast. Just wanted to give you my thoughts really on hiring Darren Moore, and first of all say congratulations on hiring probably the nicest, most decent bloke in the whole of football. He's an unbelievable man. He's an amazing ambassador for any football club he works for. And he won't just be manager of your football club. He will do so much outside of it. He will put so much into the community. He always does at every club. He throws himself into the community program when he goes to a club. So you've got more than a manager, I think, is the first important thing to say. And I think that gets undervalued because people are so obsessed with results on the pitch. But the reality with Darren is he does things that matter more than football. And I know it's very easy to think football is all that matters at times, but there are things that matter a lot more than football in this life. And Darren will get massively involved in those. In terms of the type of manager, it's tricky for me to say because I think Darren, what we saw at West Brom was Darren in his formative years as a manager. It was his first job. And we saw two very different styles of football when he took over from Alan Pardew right at the end of the Premier League season and nearly kept us up. He went back to basics a little bit. It was more attacking than Pulis ball, but it wasn't miles off it. He went back to the simple things that he knew the players could do well. But then his next season, when he was ultimately relieved of his duties with the team, I think fourth in the table, it was a much more offensive style of play. It was quite an idealistic style of play, which I think in the end was probably what cost him. We'd obviously got Gale and Rodriguez up front, both of whom scored over 20 goals that season. We had Harvey Barnes for the first part of the season. First of all, if we'd kept Harvey Barnes and Leicester hadn't recalled him in January, I think we would have gone up no problem, and Darren would quite possibly still be the West Bromwich Albion manager. So he was massively unfortunate in that respect. I do think he probably needed to be a little bit more pragmatic at times. He probably needed to look at how we could be a bit more solid on occasions. And as I say, he was a little idealistic in the way he wanted to play. I also think he wanted to play out from the back, and I'm not necessarily sure at the time we had the players to do it. Carl Bartley struggled with it. It's something Sam Johnston hadn't done before, and we didn't have Romain Sawyers sat in front of the back four like we did the next season. However, having watched Darren's team since, I don't think that's the way he plays anymore. It's when a manager has his first job, it's not surprising that he then evolves his style. He learns from his mistakes. He made mistakes at the Albion. I don't think anybody would deny that, not even Darren. But he's definitely learned from them. And you look at the amount of points he racked up at Sheffield Wednesday last season. Forget the fact they finished third. And I mean that's a freak. That's a freak. No team with that number of points should ever finish third. So he was massively unlucky. In terms of his appointment at Town, I think it's a progressive appointment. I think it's an appointment where you need to give him time, because Darren is going to be a change from a Neil Warnock style of play. I've got no doubt about that. And you're going to have to build him a squad over a few windows that suits him. I think if the fans can stay patient with him, I think long term you could have a really, really top manager on your hands in terms of how he performs for you. I think he already is a top manager, but I just think the difficulty when he's quite different to what's gone before is that he is going to need a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. And I suppose ultimately that comes down to whether your fans can be patient. And that's hard in football, because a lot of football fans don't want to give managers time. As soon as they start seeing managers lose games, they lose their heads. And I hope that doesn't happen to him at Huddersfield, because there might be a little bit of a period of transition. I mean, obviously, I did work with Darren during my time at West Brom. I mean, just to be honest, to reiterate what I said before, he was just a thoroughly brilliant bloke to be around. However, it's worth saying as well, Darren is a winner, and he can be a scary guy when he wants to be. He is a very, very nice fella. Most of the time, he's a real gentle giant. But I tell you what, if he sees players not pulling their weight, I mean, I saw this with youth team players. Like he wouldn't accept unprofessional behaviour. He's a born winner. And I was also doing a session with my university students with his with the sports psychologist who worked with him at Sheffield Wednesday, and he said after the 4-0 defeat in the first leg at Sheffield Wednesday, Darren Moore rang him up at 5 a.m. the next day and basically hadn't been to bed. He just watched the tape of the game over and over and over again to understand how they'd lost that game 4-0. That's Darren. You've got a winner on your hands. The man does not accept defeat. He wants to analyse it. He wants to understand it. He wants to learn from it, and he wants to improve. And as I say, if you give him time, it might not happen right away. I hope it does happen right away. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it happens immediately, and except for when you play us. But I think if you give him time, he will win for you. But as with most managers in the Championship, how much time are they going to get? It remains to be seen. I hope Darren gets time. I hope he succeeds, because he is one of the best people in football, and I honestly believe he is a born winner, and that's what he will do for Huddersfield if you give him the time to do it.
Right, Brady, on to Doncaster. Unfortunately, couldn't get anybody from their side to tell us about his time, but I've always thought he did a really good job at Doncaster, Brady. There were so many low expectations when he went in there, and if it wasn't for COVID, he may have potentially got them in the playoffs. So it's a really good job he's done there. So at this point, we can see Darren Moore's career is building, and then it comes to his prior job before joining Huddersfield Town, and that was at Sheffield Wednesday, where you could probably say there was a lot of pressure on him to succeed here. He's got a fan base desperate for success, and this is probably where the largest range of opinion comes from in terms of Darren Moore. If you look online, you can see things ranging from him being a brilliant manager to being useless, as such as football Twitter is. It's a very funny place, isn't it, Brady? But what I'll do is I spoke to the head of Wednesday Till I Die, which is a podcast on Sheffield Wednesday, and I spoke to James Mappin, who is the host there. And this is a little chat that me and James had earlier. Hi, James. Thanks for speaking to us today. Just let me know, mate, what type of manager are Huddersfield Town getting with Darren Moore?
Yeah, in terms of a manager, Darren Moore is, I'd have to say, he's just a fantastic guy and just a fantastic gentleman. When he came in, he made a point of just getting to know everyone at the club. Not just obviously the players, but everyone behind the scenes that makes the football club tick, really. And, I think you've probably seen videos of him clapping along to High Silver Lining at the start of the matches and stuff like that, getting involved. He just really bought into the culture of the football club. I suppose not even that. He created a culture of the club. Some criticise him for it, saying he's a nice guy, but too much of a nice guy. You could say that to a certain degree. However, for me, that's certainly a quality that you want in a manager. That everyone likes him. It's clear that all the players liked him as well. When you see, the aftermath of the Peterborough game at the end of last season as well, saying it was Darren Moore that actually instilled that belief into the team, and made them believe that they could actually do it. So, in terms of style, I think he wanted to try and play with wingers, but injuries meant that we had to play a 5-3-2 for much of last season. He got named the Tinker Man. He does like to make changes. I think that's broadly looking at the bigger picture, to be honest. Looking at trying to minimise as many injuries as you possibly can. It didn't really happen for us. I think we were just really unlucky, to be honest, with injuries that we had. But for me, yes, he does have his flaws. Not every manager's fantastic and great. If he were that good, it wouldn't be, no disrespect, he wouldn't be at Huddersfield or Sheffield Wednesday. He'd be in the Prem. But no, for me, I thought he was a fantastic manager.
And what would you say are his main strengths and weaknesses?
In terms of strengths and weaknesses, kind of touched on it just then. Strengths for me is just his approach to everything. His approach to everyday life at Sheffield Wednesday. It's clear to see, obviously now he's gone, that the current manager we've got doesn't quite get along with certain players. We had that in the past as well with Gary Monk and Jos Lukai. We didn't have any of that with Darren Moore. He managed to get a tune out of players. He signed some players, Saido Berahino and Nathaniel Mendez-Lang, just being two, that didn't have a fantastic past, but again, he managed to get a tune out of them to a certain extent. I know it didn't work out fantastically, but there were certainly free transfers that other teams weren't willing to take on, and he, like I said, he took them under his wing and got something out of them. In terms of weaknesses, there's been a few times where perhaps the tactics, in-game tactics, haven't changed as soon as what we perhaps like. You could easily see that things need to change, but he's not made that change quick enough. And sometimes some of his substitutions has been left to be desired. He does like to play players out of position as well. He wants players to be able to play more than one position at all times, really, which again can be seen as a strength. However, sometimes you can see players a little bit out of the depth, and when doing that, we had Marvin Johnson playing at left centre half at one point. Look, he did great there, and it was all right. I would much prefer an actual left centre half playing in that position though than a left winger, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Okay, it's interesting. What was his time like at Sheffield Wednesday? Would you say he met expectations?
He came in at Sheffield Wednesday when we were doomed for relegation, really. We had the points deductions when we were in the Championship. He came from Doncaster. Some people say that the reason why we got relegated was down to him. I think that's really unfair, to be honest. Yes, it went down to the last game of the season. Yes, the game against Derby on the last game of the season wasn't good enough. However, we should have been relegated well before then. A lot of players had damn tools, so I think that was unfair. I think he was brought in as a manager to get us out of League One when the inevitable happened, and you could say he has done that. Now, some people say that we should have gone up automatically in both of those seasons. I think I'd have to agree, really. The first season we were more than good enough to get promoted, and obviously we lost to Sunderland in the playoffs. The second season, well, we should have been promoted by February time, I would have thought, and obviously we had that poor run of form. However, 96 points in a season and not getting automatic promotion, I just think we've been incredibly unlucky. He brought in a lot of players, a lot of different players that we'd not seen. I think he's got some fantastic contacts in the game as well. People are willing to loan players out to us, which I don't think we'd have got if we'd not got Darren Moore at the helm. So I think really when you look at it, in terms of did he meet expectations, yes, we've got out of the league that we was in. Did we do it, the way that we perhaps wanted? Probably not. However, we're now sitting as a Championship club, and we're a League One club for the past 2 seasons. So, I think he's met his expectations. However, I don't think a lot of people would share that same viewpoint. Some people do think that he should have done a lot better.
Okay, so from gauging some Sheffield Wednesday fan opinion on social media, Moore is often criticised for a lack of tactical acumen. Would you say that's fair? I'd heard or read somewhere that the players were responsible for delivering tactics at Sheffield Wednesday and not Moore and his backroom team. Is there any truth to that, or is that just one of those rumours that tends to circulate enough times on social media to become a fact?
I must admit that's not something that I've heard myself. I did mention just a minute ago about his in-game tactics that are sometimes questioned in terms of how he changes the game when it's clear that things aren't working. He perhaps does leave it a little bit late. You'll probably see most of his substitutions around the 60-minute mark. He likes to wait until that point, even though he perhaps should change things at half time. Like I said, I've not heard that one myself, and I don't think that's particularly true. But yeah, I mean, it might be. You never know.
And what do you think to his appointment at Huddersfield Town?
Yeah, all the best to him. I thought it was a bit strange that he'd perhaps not got a job sooner than what he had. I don't know his personal circumstances and everything. Clearly, he was obviously just holding out for a job that he wanted. I'm sad to see him go, really. It's like an ex-girlfriend when they get with another bloke, I guess, when it comes to Darren Moore. But no, all the best to him. I think he's fantastic. I've heard some people saying he's a bit underwhelming appointment. Again, no disrespect, but I don't really know who you were expecting to bring in, to be honest. Look, I think he's going to do a great job there. You're down here like us as well, obviously doing a little bit better than us at the moment, but I think he's probably a long-term project. I don't think he's a short-term fix. He's going to have a transfer window in January, and then fingers crossed you could still be in the division come the end of the season, and then he'll be able to instill his philosophy and belief. I think the backroom staff are fantastic as well. Adrian Basso, the goalkeeping coach, has seen massive improvements on our goalkeepers whilst he was there. It's Jimmy Shanks as well. He came in and we had the longest unbeaten run that we've ever had. It's no surprise that, like I said, when he brought Jimmy in, we did go on that long run. A lot of work that he's done behind the scenes. So he doesn't just come as Darren Moore. It comes as his whole complete package with his backroom staff as well, which I think he'll do well there, and I do wish him all the best.
Is there anything else that Huddersfield Town fans should know about Darren Moore that they wouldn't already know?
I don't know if this is a Sheffield Wednesday thing, but don't ask Darren Moore about injuries. He gave absolutely nothing away in any press conferences. He would just straight up refuse to answer the question. You don't hear anything about who's fit, who's not fit, how long they're out for, things like that. He did stay very tight-lipped. Like I said, I don't know if that was a Sheffield Wednesday directive or whether it was like that at other clubs, but he certainly didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to focus on the positives as well, always looking forward to the next game, which I suppose most managers try and do. We didn't really get much out of the press conferences, to be honest. He very rarely divulged into stuff. I think he's a very private man, and that comes across in his media interviews and stuff like that. But no, a fantastic bloke. I do wish that we weren't having this conversation, because that would have meant that Darren Moore was still manager at Sheffield Wednesday. And I think when you come to Hillsborough in a couple of weeks' time, he'll probably get a standing ovation from three sides of Hillsborough when he walks out. We've had not much success in recent years. The other promotion was 11 seasons ago when we came out of League One. Before that, 6-7 years again, and after that we've got to go back to the 90s when we were playing in the Premier League. So he's given us something that we'll remember for many, many years to come. That night against Peterborough at Hillsborough was fantastic. The day down in London at Wembley for the playoff final was equally as good. And yeah, he'll be sorely missed, especially from myself and everyone at the podcast anyway.
Right, thank you very much to James there from the Wednesday Till I Die podcast. Good podcast, always pop up on Spaces as well. If you ever fancy getting involved with a Sheffield Wednesday fan podcast, there's the perfect one to do that with. Right then, Bradle Juice, you had a little tete-a-tete with our pal Dom Howson, didn't you? So let's cut to that one.
Cool. So I am joined now by the EFL editor for Reach in Yorkshire and North East. It's Mr. Dom Howson. Dom, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. It's been a busy week.
It certainly has. That's why you're here today to talk to me. So obviously we'll get straight into it then, because Darren Moore's been appointed as Huddersfield Town manager, and as the listeners may know, you covered Sheffield Wednesday for quite a while. So I suppose you're the best person to ask this, really. What type of manager are Huddersfield getting in Darren Moore?
They're getting someone who has got a very good win record. I think even to this day, his style of football did divide the Wednesday fans. I think that is a fair assessment. But he did achieve the ultimate goal, right? He had 2 years of where this, and the second year, it was paramount that he got them promoted. 96 points, 23 match unbeaten run. And in any other year, they would have gone up automatically. But Ipswich and Plymouth were exceptional in getting 98 and 101 points. So unprecedented. The top three in League One last season were streets ahead of the rest. So you do have to take that into account. He did have a big playing budget at his disposal for League One level. I think that should be said. And he made a lot of signings over the 2 years, but following relegation in 2021, and I think we have to give some context and start from there, really, that he came in March and the club were an absolute mess. You're talking players weren't getting paid in full, on time. They'd had a points deduction. They'd had numerous managers that season, from Gary Monk to Tony Pewis to Neil Thompson was in caretaker charge. It was a really low point, Sheffield Wednesday, when Darren Moore came in. And I still believe to this day he would have kept them in the Championship had he not struggled with COVID, really hit him hard. He was fighting for his life in hospital and he missed half a dozen matches. And so his assistant, Jamie Smith, who's come with him to Huddersfield as part of his backroom staff, he was sort of overseeing the team while Darren was recovering in hospital. And he came back for their final match against Derby on the last day of the season. And if Wednesday had won, they would have stayed up. But it finished 3-3 in the end. And he had to rebuild the club from top to bottom, and I'm not just talking about the personnel and players, bringing them in. I'm talking about the culture, which you're going to find he's going to talk an awful lot about that at Huddersfield Town, especially with all the structural changes Town have made in the last 3 months under Kevin Nagel. But yeah, for Darren Moore, unity and bringing that sort of togetherness to Sheffield Wednesday. I think that that is what, when you look back on the legacy and what he achieved and what he did at Wednesday, it wasn't just that he got them up, but that day at Wembley, that sort of crystallised everything of where it looked as if Wednesday were going to be on a club on the up. He brought the feel-good factor. He had his challenges, and there were times where he did come under serious pressure because Wednesday were the big fish in League One. They were there to be shot at. Everybody expected them to be challenging for promotion. Even in the first year, when he had to rebuild the team, he lost a lot of key players. And I think that ultimately he achieved his brief at Wednesday. It wasn't always pretty. Some of the football was pragmatic, and I think that will be the case at times with Town, where needs must. And we've already seen that there is a 3-year plan for Town to get back into the Premier League. And what Darren Moore's shown in his 5 and a bit years of management is he'll do whatever is necessary to get results and to achieve the ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's interesting. And touching on tactics, because we've heard, from a couple of fans of the teams he's managed, it can vary really. I mean, and I've seen that's some of the criticism from Wednesday fans. I mean, what do you make of Darren Moore's style of play, or does it, like you say, does it kind of vary on the opposition and the squad and all the factors that normally come into this sort of stuff?
I expect him at Town to tactically mix things up more than he did at Wednesday. So Darren Moore's preferred formation, certainly at Doncaster, was 4-2-3-1. And we fully expected him in his first full year in charge at Wednesday to go with that system no matter what. But after about half a dozen matches, and Wednesday started off slow, didn't get many points on the board, he abandoned it. Wednesday, they didn't have the personnel to play 4-2-3-1. It was Lee Gregory up front on his own, and he's not the quickest, is Gregory. He needs runners, he needs people around him. And so Darren Moore went to 3-5-2, and they were immediately way better. And it was the demand at Wednesday as well at home. The home fans want to see them playing with 2 up front. And so I think that's where the vision aligns at Town, of where, from what I've seen of the team, I believe with the personnel Town have got right now, 3-5-2 is the system that suits Town the most. You look at the centre-backs, Pearson, Hellick, and Lees, now that he's back, those 3, that's like your spine. You get Hogg in there. And then up front, I think we've seen that Harrott probably isn't capable of playing up front on his own just yet. Ditto Hudlin, and Danny Ward has not had, we know the best of starts to the season. So I think that's how Darren Moore is going to go at Town. And also, you look at the wing backs, he'd be really excited about the prospect of working with Sorba Thomas, potentially playing on the right, and then Jaheim Headley on the left. He want them to be quick on the counter attack, in transition. And I think he sees players like Thomas Headley, Josh Karoma. Those are exactly the sort of flair, adventurous players that I think Darren Moore will really enjoy working with. And plus, he's got a background in youth football of developing players, and so he does fit in a lot of ways. I can understand the appointment. The more I thought about it from Huddersfield's perspective, I know that there are some Huddersfield fans out there who are underwhelmed by it, but I think maybe given time, I think they could warm to Darren Moore. And, I've not even got onto the character of the man. He is one of football's good guys. I've not met anybody in the game that's got a bad word to say about Darren Moore. He is a classy bloke. He's a gentleman. You'll see that there's a social media video that went viral when he was at Wednesday, when a little boy came up to him and was wanting advice on for his Sunday football team. And Darren Moore that spoke to that youngster like he would to journalists, like he would to anybody, giving him advice. And that's not him putting it on for show. That's who Darren Moore is. What you see with him is what you get. There will be times, I think, where Town fans are maybe scratching their head tactically at substitutions and his time, when he makes subs or not always making subs, those sort of decisions. And then in game, I still think there are elements to his management that, he's got to learn and adapt. But certainly at Wednesday, he got them promoted, and that's what he had to do. And he was under enormous pressure throughout the whole season. So I think he deserves enormous credit for that.
Yeah, and I suppose my final question, you kind of touched on it a little bit there. For people, I don't know if I'm revealing on the pod, but obviously you have a slight affection for Huddersfield. You're a Huddersfield fan. What do you make of the appointment for Huddersfield?
I suppose people look at it and go, why did Town not make a managerial decision sooner then, with the fact that Darren Moore has been available since the summer? But they've done their due diligence. And you look at some of the other candidates that are out there, Nathan Jones was a complete non-starter with what happened in the playoffs when he was at Luton. You had on the bookies list, Chris Wilder, for example, was at the John Smiths on Wednesday night. And so that also got people talking. But you look at Wilder, a fantastic job that he did at Sheffield United, but then his last two roles at Middlesbrough and Watford haven't ended so well. So he would have had a point to prove, just as Darren Moore does at Championship level now with Town. And your Town could have taken a left field choice of a John Terry, a Wayne Rooney, a Frank Lampard. They could have gone for a big name that maybe would have got the juices flowing more among the fan base. But for where Town are right now, Darren Moore is a builder of football clubs. And what we've seen at Town under Nagel is that they're trying to put foundations in for the future with all the senior management and people that they've brought in behind the scenes, so that they can try and achieve the 3-year Premier League plan. And they're not hiding away from that. And I think it's good that they've said, this is the target, this is what we're going for. And Darren Moore has said that as much himself in his first press conference. He said that he knows that there's pressure with it, but there is in football generally. So to answer your question, I think Darren Moore could prove to be a shrewd appointment for Town in the long term. He needs to get results, I think, in the first few weeks. There's no getting away from that. But he could do with a fast start to buy himself time to then make the long-term changes that he'll want to make. And like I say, he's not afraid to, for football to be a bit ugly. He knows it's results driven. So he'll do whatever I think it takes to ensure that he gets that time to then really oversee the vision that he wants. And so, I think that's probably where I am, really. The more I've talked and thought about Darren Moore's appointment, I've talked myself into, I think it could work out for Town as long as he's given the time and people are patient with what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. But Dom, that's perfect. Thanks so much for coming on.
anytime.
Yeah, decent that there. Frosty McFang. Dom's always decent, isn't he? And yeah, I think we all know he's a bit of a Town fan on the sly, don't we? Right, mate, the press conference. In came Darren Moore between Jake Edwards and Mark Cartwright. What did you make of it?
I think press conferences, they're always difficult, aren't they? And it's more about reading in between the lines. I think for me, Darren Moore came across really well. I think, we kind of knew that. A lot of people have mentioned how he's a good ambassador for your club. I think he was very respectful about what he said about Neil as well, as you can imagine. And you mentioned that he played under him. I think it was good. It's a good first impression. I'm sure we'll talk about our opinions on it, but I think initially when the announcement was made, I was more. I didn't necessarily think it was the best appointment. I think it's more the timing of it and who he's replacing. I think we can probably talk about this in a bit slightly more detail, but if we appointed Darren Moore after Mark Fotheringham, a man who gets far more mention than he should, I think people will be talking about how it's a really positive appointment. I think it's just the timing and who he's replacing is maybe the thing you can question. But yeah, no, it's exciting. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting time, and obviously Jake Edwards talked about how he's kind of the person. They hired him on a 3-year deal, perhaps more, and they've got this vision of 3 years to the Premier League. So huge statement and ambition. And I know me and you have talked about how the club previously have really played down ambition, under maybe previous ownership, how we are the little terrier. And it's good to hear people talking about Huddersfield with their chest out. And, obviously results and what happens in the next 3 years, they'll be ultimately judged on. But I suppose you've got to enjoy the journey. And if they're talking like this and that's what they're saying, I think it's maybe time to get on board.
It was all perception for me, Brady, wasn't it? Because Neil Warnock, without knowing the facts of what was going on in the background, and there's a lot of speculation, isn't there, which I'm not really interested in going into too much detail on at the moment. It seemed a very peculiar time because Neil Warnock it just turned around that difficult start. Start was tough, which we all knew it was at the beginning of the season and when we saw the fixtures come out. But winning 2 games in a row and then a point against Stoke as well, albeit we already knew Neil Warnock was leaving at that point. And the football was decent as well, and things looked like they were going quite well on the field. And players that had underperformed under the previous 2 managers were now performing quite well. And I know there's a lot of criticism about Neil Warnock and young players, but you look at your likes of Diarra, Redoni, even some of the older ones, Edmonds Green, slightly older, they'd all performed at a level up under Neil Warnock, and everything just seemed to align quite well. And then when Jake Edwards, and to be fair, it was Neil Warnock who really threw the 3-year Premier League thing in first, wasn't it? That was his first grenade. I noticed there were quite a few grenades in there from Neil Warnock with a smiling assassin, isn't he, almost? And there were just a couple of things there where if you're a football fan and you're happy with Neil Warnock, and you love Neil Warnock like we do, and then the talk is Premier League, the next man is the man to get us there, you kind of expect something a little grandiose, don't you? Or a big statement. And Darren Moore just kind of feels a bit safe. So the actions and the talk don't quite initially marry up. But I think as we get further down the line and we see things happening, and you could see in the press conference, people talk about alignment quite a lot. And Lee Bromby used to talk about alignment, didn't he? And I know it used to wind people up. But he was right in a lot of ways with what they had with Carlos Corberán. They needed everything to align perfectly. And you could just kind of see how happy they were in each other's company. I know everybody's sort of on their best behaviour when they first meet each other, aren't they? But they just seemed quite a good... I'm not going to say the word that begins with S that they always use on The Apprentice and things like that. But there just seemed quite a good connection between them that made me feel quite happy between Jake Edwards. Jake Edwards always impresses me when he speaks in press conferences. He's a real cut above, I think, what we've had in the past. Mark Cartwright had a word. Mark Cartwright's a bit gruffer, isn't he? But, again, it was interesting to see what he had to say as well. And there just seems to be a real sort of collective, rather than it being the Neil Warnock show, if you know what I mean. And it kind of, and you sort of look at them and you sort of think, yeah, I get this when you see them together, and you can see them collaborative, being collaborative and working collaboratively, which is something that they mentioned as well in the press conference. And I can see why Darren Moore is the person that's been chosen. The things I always heard was, lovely bloke, rubbish with tactics. That was always the throwaway comment, mostly from, I think, Sheffield Wednesday fans. And I think the impression that I always got from other fans was that he delivered slightly under what was expected. I think there was the expected automatic promotion at West Brom, and they were fourth, and he got sacked prior to the playoffs, which did seem a harsh sacking, I'll be honest, at the time. And then at Sheffield Wednesday, the expectation was to win the league or top two, and they kind of fell slightly. I know they were winning the league by a mile and they looked good, and then they kind of tailed off again. But the job at Doncaster in between was really good. I thought that was impressive. And when we did the podcast the other day, episode 183, I said Huddersfield Town will need to look for a builder. And I was thinking of Mark Robbins, really, and the job Mark Robbins has done at Coventry. So it was quite interesting you mentioned Robbins in the press conference. But I can see why Darren Moore is someone they look at and think, yeah, Darren Moore can build a side here, because he's very intelligent, and the way he looks at things is quite refreshing as well. And I think, as an aside, one thing I really liked was he was given the opportunity to pile on the Sheffield Wednesday on a Chansiri, wasn't he? But he just dealt with it with a smile. And I just thought the guy's got a lot of class about him. He carries himself really well with an enormous amount of class, and that was never going to be in doubt. I think it's really reassuring to hear from Chris and James that tactically he's not as bad as been made out, and that's typical football fandom. And I'm quite looking forward to it now. I just had that. The thing I heard a year ago was that the players at Sheffield Wednesday did the tactics, and I heard that from quite a good source, and I was like, oh, that doesn't sound great, sort of thing. And I'm glad that James has kind of knocked that on the head a little bit. And I think it was quite important to do this, because I think people that felt a bit meh about the whole thing can now listen to the others and go, actually, there's something that we can get quite excited about here. And what I quite like is it's long term as well. I know there's no such thing as long term in football. The average manager lasts 14 months or whatever. But there just feels like a genuine attempt here to build something. And I can see what they're trying to do off the field. I can see now what they're trying to do on the field. And I'm quite happy to buy my season card, buy the shirts, buy, bits and bats, be a Blue and White Foundation member and support it. I'm behind this. I'm not going to sit here and predict that Huddersfield Town will be in the Premier League in 3 years. I think that's a very difficult thing to achieve, because there's so many teams looking at doing it, and so many teams that are coming down with 45 million quid a year in parachute payments. It's difficult, isn't it? Unless you throw ridiculous amounts of money. We saw Leeds lost 50 million when they got promoted to the Premier League in that one season, and the previous was like 35. No idea how they're not under FFP sanctions, but there we go. So there's a lot here which I can see being an incredible positive, and I can see how they work together really well. And Huddersfield's a team, and Cosy mentions this on the pod all the time, is that Huddersfield Town fans react really well to managers that are big characters. And, like you think of Peter Jackson, you think of Neil Warnock, you think of David Wagner, and then people that don't have that personality, like Carlos Corberán, although he was successful. Danny Schofield was a bit quiet, wasn't he? They tend not to be looked on as favourably. And I see the character of Darren Moore, and I think, do you know what? I think the fans will like him. I think they'll appreciate his honesty. And I think there's someone to get behind. And do you know what, Brady? I've talked for a while there, so it's your turn. But there are things to get excited about here, just as long as the promise of, financial investment in the playing staff is followed through, which I'm sure it will be. We've seen Ben Wiles come in for, a decent amount of money. If we can keep picking up one or two players like that, maybe one or two a window is probably a little bit ambitious, but where I'm going like that with that. One or two players like that every sort of 12 months or so, then Huddersfield Town are going to start heading upwards rather than downwards, and that's a good thing, and that's what we all want, isn't it?
It is, and I think I've said this on the pod, so sorry if listeners have heard me say this before, and I'm repeating myself here. But cards on the table. I didn't really want Neil Warnock to stay here for another year. I thought he did an absolutely fantastic job last season. I don't think we could have got any other manager to achieve the result that he could, because he is just, he's the best in that type of situation. I could see why it made a lot of sense to bring Neil in, even if it wasn't necessarily my preferred. And I think, like we've touched on, the only odd thing is the timing. I think if when the dust has settled a little bit, and if Darren gets off to a good start, because as we all know, unfortunately, it's a results business, and I think it'll long be forgotten, really. But yeah, I think that's the only thing. You look at this, and I think it is a good appointment. I think Darren deserves. We've heard from the other people who we've spoken to. I think he's a solid appointment, and I think he deserves a crack at the Championship. I know people talk about Sheffield Wednesday and how we're ahead, but you've got to look at the teams they were competing against as well. Plymouth, that's probably one of the best teams in League One for a long time. Ipswich, you can see what they're doing in the Championship at the moment. They're really flying.
Look how many points they got. They got 97 points and didn't get
exactly. It's unreal. Yeah. It's unreal. And I've just obviously the comeback against Peterborough, people will be like, well, how are you losing 4-0 in the first place? But I mean, to turn that around is incredible. And, he does deserve a crack. And I think the encouraging thing for me is you see what Sheffield Wednesday are doing now. You see what their ownership are like. And the fact that he's achieved all that with that going on behind the scenes. And I've seen, since he was announced, you've actually seen a few Sheffield Wednesday fans who were maybe critical of him saying, oh, I don't think we realised how good we had it under Moore. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the biggest issue Darren Moore is going to have is Neil was getting a lot out of this squad, which we have talked about a lot on the podcast. We don't think on paper it's got the best quality in terms of depth. We've already seen that Danny Ward has a niggle, and we're playing Keane Harrett, and Carl Hudlin's around there, and we're having to use Bergsorg and Koroma. That's not a criticism of those players, but it's just putting a lot of pressure on young people who haven't played a full season of Championship football. So Neil is the best of working with very little, and I think we heard this from Jake Edwards in the press conference today. If they are looking to invest in the team, I think that's a real positive, and I think that's where we can see, as you touched on, Darren Moore building something. And I think you've got to, remember we've talked about this, Matt, off air, but let's be honest, like, this isn't from any inside information that we've got, but I mean, just look at it from a logistically. If you're a player and you've got a move going on in the summer, as much as we love Neil and as much as we're going to achieve, are you going to join a club that's got a plan in place? The manager's there permanently. He's going to be there for, although, like you say, what is a long-term manager? He's got a contract for 3 years and he's made you part of the plans. I do think Town have probably suffered from, as great as it was to get Neil, and while it made a lot of sense, if you're a player, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Why would you move to somewhere where it's like, well, Neil's going to be here for a year, and then they might bring in a manager who wants nothing to do with me? So I think that's a real positive we can take from this as well. I'm not comparing Darren Moore and Neil Warnock because I think it's hard. I think you're comparing two people in very different situations, but that long-term success that you do talk about, hopefully we can bring in players, we can build that vision. And you touch about the alignment. That's where you see the alignment. If we can bring in players, have that long-term project and build, which the club from the talk sounds today seem to be doing that, I think is really positive. I think we've got to look at this as positive. Neil's done a great job, and I'm sure we'll see him probably in March getting 3 points against us at the John Smiths. But yeah, I think we've got to look at this as a real positive.
Yeah, I think so, Brady. I think when you look at it, Huddersfield Town are in good hands in terms of people that are dedicated to the task at hand. You look at a lot of Darren Moore. I know we wrote down a lot of Darren Moore quotes, didn't we? That we're probably not going to go over. But one thing that he kept saying over and over and over again was, it's time to get to work, didn't he? And I think the work ethic is what carries a club like Huddersfield higher, and has carried us higher in the past. So it feels like we're in decent hands on and off the field. I know there's been a lot of talk and we've not seen a massive amount of action, but we're starting to see that action now and plan in process, aren't we? So I think for people like me who were skeptical initially, but are now coming round to the idea, I think it's interesting, and I think the best thing to do is to see how it goes. I know people will say what they want in football, and people should say what they want in football with respect. But I can just now see it. We've said this on the podcast before, but when Kevin Nagle bought Huddersfield Town, it was pretty much a whirlwind. It was almost like a casino thing, wasn't it? Do you know, where it's like where you put the keys on the table to the stadium, and it was a very quick turnaround, very unexpected. So they've not had time to put that plan in place, and now over the summer they've had to sort of fly by the seat of the pants, and they're now putting that in place. And it's important to let them do that and reserve an element of judgment until you can see things developing in front of you. And things are developing. Darren Moore, is it a safe option? I think that's probably unkind, thinking along the lines, yes, he probably is safe, but also safe's not a bad thing, but he can also build as well. And I think the building side of thing is very important, because Huddersfield Town, in terms of revenue, have always been at the bottom end of this division, and they've always had to sell players to just kind of survive. And the off-field stuff excites me as much as the on-field. It's going to be interesting to see the revenues build off, on the commercial side, and the team build on the field. So I'm quite happy to see how this goes. It's probably not the big statement I thought we might get, or hoped we might get, when they kind of said 3-year Premier League plan. Neil Warnock has to go now. But I get it. I do get it. When I see them all together, it makes sense. I get it. I wish everybody the best of luck. Because at the end of the day, if they're successful, we're happy, and that's all we want to be, isn't it? So let's see how this goes, Brady.
Yeah, and just one final thing from me, and I kind of mentioned it and tweeted about it yesterday, but a big part, obviously results were a big part of why everyone got on board with Neil, but also he made you feel connected to the club. And the thing we've heard time and time again from Darren Moore is how much of a gentleman he is. I think gentle giant was the words some people have used, and he makes you feel connected, and he's a really good representative, an ambassador of your club. And that's really important, for me personally. I think for a lot of fans is feeling connected to the club, and I think we're going to see that. You've seen the videos online of him chatting to young fans after the games and giving them advice about football, and he just seems like a really nice guy. And I know it's a ruthless results business, and ultimately that will judge him, but
don't mess with him though, would you? He's huge. You won't mess with him either.
No,
might be nice, but there's no way of messing with him. Yeah.
No, exactly.
I have to watch what I say on this podcast in future.
Don't we all? But yeah, no, I think that's really important. We talked about, in the good days under Dean as well. Like, although it was fantastic to be in the Premier League, all the stuff outside that we were doing to help the community is really important to us, and it is still really important to us. And the new ownership have said that, and I think having someone who's the spokesperson of your club who comes across well and speaks so well, that's really important to me. It makes me feel connected to the club, and I think we will see that as time goes on. When the dust has settled down after Neil, how good that is, because that's the consistency from all the people we've spoken to, how good a person he is and how well he comes across. And as well as finding out from former fans at his club, we also wanted to know during the press conference how he came across and what it was like from someone who was there. So earlier I caught up with Katherine from BBC Radio Leeds, who attended the press conference and actually asked Darren Moore some questions about what the atmosphere was like and how he came across. Hi, Katherine. Thanks again for joining us. So obviously you were at the press conference today. Can you tell us about what it was like being in the press room?
Hiya, Brady. Yeah, a really, really interesting press conference today at Huddersfield Town, and a really lovely opportunity to have a chat with the new manager, Darren Moore. Also to ask a few more questions of CEO Jake Edwards and the sporting director, Mark Cartwright, as well. For me, just really interesting to try and get to the bottom of what it was on both sides as to how this appointment has come about from Darren Moore. What was it about this job that particularly appealed to him? And then an opportunity as well to ask some questions about the recruitment process. For him, he just really feels that this is a great club, a huge opportunity, and sees there as big plans for the bigger picture going forwards as well. He was very keen to reiterate it's not just about the work that he's excited to do with the Huddersfield Town first team, but that he's really keen to be involved in all aspects of the club, the town, big role in the community as well. And he just really couldn't wait to get started.
Yeah, and I suppose Town fans can't wait for him to get started. Very intrigued to see what happens. Now, being there in person, what was the reaction like among the crowd? And was there anything you picked up during the presser that maybe we didn't see watching online?
It was a really, really busy press conference today, as you would imagine. In fact, actually, I think there were probably more people there today than there were on Monday when it was confirmed that Neil Warnock and Ronnie Jepson would be leaving. So a lot of media interest in the appointment of Darren Moore. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact that he has a lot of really strong connections with this part of the world, with the whole of Yorkshire. Time at Barnsley, of course, at Doncaster. He played at Bradford City, getting them promoted to the Premier League. And of course, most recently with his time at Sheffield Wednesday as well. Interesting that he was very, very keen not to get into dialogue about Sheffield Wednesday today. He was very adamant, very polite, but very adamant that no, today is all about my appointment at Huddersfield Town, what I want to do with this club going forwards. He didn't want to get into the whys and wherefores of the end of his tenure at Sheffield Wednesday. I'm sure it's something that will crop up again in the not too distant future because, of course, the Terriers go to Hillsborough, don't they, in a few weeks' time. But he was, very politely shutting all lines of inquiry down about that today. He was purely focused on, on Huddersfield Town and his plans for the future going forward here.
And obviously you talk about going forward. I mean, what are your thoughts on the appointment of Darren Moore following your chat today? And how did he come across?
Yeah, in terms of what I think of Darren Moore as an appointment, I think it's a really good, solid, sensible choice. I think Huddersfield Town have gone a bit left field in recent years with some of their appointments, and it would probably be fair to say it's not particularly worked. Now, I guess they could have gone for, and this is no respect to Darren Moore, maybe a more showbiz appointment, a more glamorous appointment. You know, we've heard the name of Wayne Rooney being bandied around. You can imagine, can't you, the level of interest that would have attracted. But in terms of looking at someone's CV, is this the right man for the job? Does he have the credentials? Does he have the right managerial style? Is he a good fit with Huddersfield Town? I would have to say that, Darren Moore ticks so many of those boxes. And that's what Mark Cartwright, the sporting director, was saying today as well, and Jake Edwards, that when they were looking at this process of who was going to replace Neil Warnock, they had a whole lot of analysis done. They looked at so many different factors and said when it was the same names kind of cropping up at the top of their lists for all the things that they were looking for. And of course, Darren Moore, clearly at the top of that, they were keen to say that, they looked at various different possibilities, but he was the name that really struck them as being the best one to go forward. And as I say, I thought he came across really, really well today, Darren Moore. He didn't come across making a load of big claims, a load of bold statements, but equally, he didn't want to limit what can be achieved this season. He's ultimately been brought in as part of this 3-year plan to get Huddersfield Town into the Premier League. And as you'll hear in our conversation for BBC Radio Leeds, I asked him, the 3-year plan starts here. What can you actually achieve this season? And he said, I don't want to put a ceiling on that. He wants to just see exactly what this team is capable of going forward. So sky's the limit as far as he's concerned. But I say no big brash statements that might come back to haunt him further down the line. And he came across really well and is clearly just really excited to get going.
Thanks, Katherine. Finally, I suppose, is there anything else you'd like to add or anything maybe fans missed that you saw while you were there?
I think final thoughts then, as I say, he's really keen to get out on the training pitch, Darren Moore, as quick as possible to meet the players. He's got a game on Monday night. So he kind of knows that there's very little that you can do in terms of preparing a squad, preparing a side for a team with such short notice. He's literally going to have one training session with his players. But he was clearly very excited to get stuck into this new challenge. He got a bit of a twinkle in his eye. He said that he has been doing some media work over the last few months. You might have seen him pop up as a summariser on a few of the Sky Sports games. Said he'd enjoyed that, and it's something that he maybe will go and do a bit more of further down the line. But for now, he was just so excited to be back in management, doing a job that he sees as a great challenge, a great opportunity, unlimited potential, and just really wants to get out there working with the players and see what happens on Monday night away at Coventry. A great team to play in his opening fixture. And he actually made some comparisons with Mark Robins at Coventry and the stability that they've shown there. And that was also a message coming from the board today that, this is part of a long-term 3-year plan. They're going to be sticking with Darren Moore. They're backing him. They're going to back him in the transfer window as well when it comes around in January and next summer as well. So this is a project for the long term, and that stability that Darren Moore reference that we've seen at Coventry City is something that hopefully will be replicated for Huddersfield Town now. And this is sort of day one of a 3-year building process, which they hope will see them end up in the Premier League.
Amazing. Thanks, Katherine, and catch up with you soon.
Right, Brady, I think that's enough of the talking for now, isn't it? And more action, and we'll see how Huddersfield get on Monday evening against Coventry. That puts pressure on me to get this podcast out, doesn't it, before the game? So, there we go. I know, never stop. We never stop for you guys. But that's it. So just a final reminder that this podcast, as always, is sponsored by Magic Rock Brewing. Thanks to Magic Rock for their continued support of the podcast. Make sure you get there before the next home game, because you'll see people like Brady milling around, and he's not hard to miss being 7'3". So make sure you buy him a pint if you see him. So then, Frosty the Podman, I think everybody seems quite happy to give Darren Moore a bit of a go. That is, unless your name is Stan. Who's Stan? Well, I think we all know a Stan, don't we? And here's Adam Jarrell with a song to explain. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
I sold this club at all, a non-existent transfer window, and Neil's gone and all. But when I ran the club, it wasn't always great, but Wagner's picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad, it's not so bad. The fans have gone cold, I'm wondering why. I sold this club at all, a non-existent transfer window, and Neil's gone and all. But when I ran the club, it wasn't always great, but Wagner's picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad, it's not so bad.
Dear Kev, I'd like to welcome you to Huddersfield Town, famous for rugby league Harold Wilson and David Brown. I hope you enjoy your trip here and it's not all for nothing. I could show you around town, I can meet you at the post office or something. We can nip down to Birkby, Marsh, Golker or Dalton. But anyways, fuck it, what's been up man, how's your 2 daughters? My girlfriend's pregnant too, I'm about to be a father. And if I've a daughter, guess what I'ma call her? I'ma name her Nagel. I hear you keeping on Neil and Ronnie too, I love it. Any fans that don't like those two, just tweet them, tell them to shove it. I know you probably hear this every day, but I'm your biggest fan. I even used to play as Sacramento Kings on NBA Jam. I got a room full of all your posters and your pictures, man. I've even replaced my wedding photo with a picture of Uncle Sam. Anyways, I hope you get this, man. Hit me back, just a chat. Truly yours, your biggest fan. And my name's Stan.
The fans have gone cold, I'm wondering why. I sold this club at all, a non-existent transfer window, and Neil's gone and all. But when I ran the club, it wasn't always great, but Wagner's picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad, it's not so bad.
Dear Kev, you still ain't called I wrote, I hope you have a chance. I ain't mad, I just feel a bit daft that you're tweeting other fans. If you didn't want to talk to me outside of Marston's, you didn't have to, but you could have signed an autograph for Matthew. That's my POS pal. He's around 40-year-old. We waited in the blistering cold for you for 4 hours and you just said no. That's pretty tight, man. You're like his fucking hero. He wants to be just like you, man. He likes you more than Dino. I ain't mad though, I just don't like being lied to. Remember when we met in Lockwood? You said if I'd write you, you'd write back. Because we were queuing for Dixon's. I gave you a thumbs up and said it's a fucking dream. Then my lad got pissed off because we couldn't afford ice cream. I know you've hardly signed anyone, we haven't been here long, but we can't be losing out on players to Rotherham or West Brom. I ain't really got out else, so when town scrap I get depressed. I even got a tattoo of your name across my chest. Sometimes I show people down Slubbers just for adrenaline, I tell you. It's such a sudden rush for me, I love it. See, everything you say is real, I respect you because you tell it. My girlfriend's jealous because I talk about you 24/7. But she don't know you like I know you, Kev, no one does. She don't know what it was like for people like us growing up. You gotta call me, man, I'll be the biggest fan you'll ever lose. Sincerely yours, Stan. P.S. We should go for a beer together too.
The fans have gone cold, I'm wondering why. I sold this club at all, a non-existent transfer window, and Neil's gone and all. But when I ran the club, it wasn't always great, but Wagner's picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad, it's not so bad.
Dear mister, I'm too good for Ronnie and Neil, what a farce. This'll be the last package I ever send your ass. Neil's been here for 7 months and now he's gone, he don't deserve it. I don't care if Darren Moore's replacing him, Neil Warnock's perfect. So this is my cassette I'm sending you, I hope you hear it. I'm in the car right now on M62 on the freeway. Hey Kev, I've been drinking at Magic Rock, you dare me to drive? You know that song we all sing called Smile a While? About how town will play up and bring back the cup? Well now we won't, because you fucked us by getting rid of them. That's kinda how this is, you could have rescued us from drowning. Now it's too late, we're 20,000 downers now, it's lousy. And all I wanted was for Neil to stay, that's all. I hope you know I ripped all your pictures off the wall. I loved you, Kev. We could have had a drink together, think about it. You ruined it now, I hope you can't sleep and you dream about it. I hope you lose your phone and you can't tweet about it. I hope your conscience eats at you and you can't breathe without me. See, Kev, shut up, love, I'm trying to talk. Hey, Kev, that's my girlfriend screaming in the trunk. But I'm not off to merry England following you no more. See, I'm not like you, because if I wear flip-flops with jeans, I'll look daft too. Well, gotta go, I'm almost at Scamandon Bridge now. Oh, bollocks, I forgot. How am I supposed to send this shit out?
The fans have gone cold, I'm wondering why. I sold this club at all, a non-existent transfer window. And Neil's gone and all. But when I ran the club, it wasn't always great. But Wagner's picture on my wall, it reminds me that it's not so bad. It's not so bad.
Dear Stan, I meant to write you sooner, but I've just been busy. You said your girlfriend's pregnant now. How far along is she? Look, I'm really flattered you would call your daughter that. And here's an autograph from Matthew. You can put it with his Purple Kings cap. I'm sorry I didn't see you at Dixon's. I must have missed you. I've seen your tweets asking if I like the fish and chips too. But what's this shit you said about me fucking up the club too? I say that shit's just clowning, dog. Come on, how negative are you? You got some issues, Stan. Let's give Darren some support. Let's get the John Smiths bouncing while we play this fantastic sport. And what's this shit about us going for a drink together? That type of shit'll make me not want us to meet each other. I really think you and your girlfriend need each other. Or maybe you should just treat her better. I hope you get to read this letter. I just hope it reaches you in time before you hurt yourself. I think you'll be doing just fine if you relax a little. I'm sorry Neil and Ronnie had to go, but Stan, why are you so mad? Try to understand that I do want to please you fans. I just don't want you to do some crazy shit. I read this one thing in the Examiner a couple of weeks ago that made me sick. Some dude was drunk and drove his car over Scamandon Bridge, and he had his girlfriend in the trunk. She was pregnant with his kid. And in the car they found a tape, but they didn't say who it was to. Come to think about it, his name was... it was you. Damn.